Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today, we are taking a close look at the GeForce RTX 4060 Ti. And no, we're not doing so because we think it's a good graphics card that you should buy, but rather because we think it's garbage and you should avoid it. Makes sense, right? Good. Well, before we get into it, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermaltake and the new CTE C750, the first release for their new centralized thermal efficiency form factor series. The CTE form factor is designed to maximize thermal performance of critical components by using a 90-degree rotated motherboard tray. And this unique orientation results in the CPU and graphics card being moved closer to the front and rear of the case, improving thermal dissipation and overall system cooling. Additionally, it supports up to 420mm AIO radiators and up to 14 fans for extreme airflow. It's also available in either a tempered glass or air version with either black or snow color variants. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so I should clarify the 4060 Ti, it's not necessarily a bad product. As in, it works, you can have a good time gaming with it, and there's real no flaw with the product. Rather, the issue is of course the price. For $400 US, it's, as I've already put it, a bad joke at that price. It struggles to compete with 2-year-old products like the RTX 3060 Ti, which we'll be taking a closer look at today. And with just 8GB of VRAM, it makes all the same mistakes that we saw from the previous generation 3070 series. And although, look, this thing, it is cheaper than those older generation products from the 3070 series, but it's worse in the sense that it has a piddly 128-bit wide memory bus. So given the price, then it is a flawed product. There's not enough VRAM, the performance overall is weak, and it is crippled by a very narrow memory bus. But my point earlier being that it works, and had it cost, let's say, $300 or less, it would actually be a really great product. As it stands right now though, you can purchase a Radeon RX 6700 XT for $330, so an almost 20% saving when compared to the 4060 Ti. And the Radeon GPU offers basically the same level of performance, at least rasterization performance. It packs an extra 4GB of VRAM, which is already coming in very handy. So if you want to know which GPU you should be purchasing right now for under $400 US, the answer is quite simply the 6700 XT or maybe the 3060 Ti. And the RTX 3060 Ti has dropped to $350 now, making it $50 cheaper than the newer 4060 Ti. And that means for those of you targeting 1440p gaming, the older 30 series part will actually offer you better value. And this is the comparison I want to delve into for today's video. The previous generation RTX 3060 Ti really highlights very clearly why the 4060 Ti sucks. If you recall, when the 3060 Ti was released, it offered a massive 50% performance boost over the 2060 Super. So after 18 months, Nvidia was offering a 50% performance uplift at the $400 price point. Now, admittedly, the Radeon RX 5700 XT was a much better value product than the 2060 Super. It also cost $400, but even so, the RTX 3060 Ti was still 20% faster, and the GeForce GPU offered better power efficiency, support for DLSS, and of course, hardware ray tracing, so it was clearly a much better product. The point being though, Nvidia was offering a 50% performance increase at the $400 price point when moving from the GeForce 20 series to the GeForce 30 series, and under no conditions was the 2060 Super even remotely comparable to the 3060 Ti. Now, by the time the 4060 Ti arrived, it had been 2.5 years since the introduction of the 3060 Ti, so you'd expect another big jump in performance after all of that time at the $400 price point. You'd also probably expect more VRAM, but we got neither of those things. And in some instances, Nvidia has actually managed to go backwards, so let's take a look at that. And just quickly for testing, the CPU used is the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D, which has been paired with the Gigabyte X670E Aorus Master using 32GB of DDR5 6000CL30 memory. I've tested 50 games at 1080p and 1440p, but I'm just going to cover the more interesting results and then we'll take a look at the margin seen across all of the games tested in a single graph. So let's get into it. First up, we have Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and I'm afraid to say that this is one of the more favourable results for the 4060 Ti, as it was 12% faster at 1080p. But as is almost always the case with the 4060 Ti, It does slot relative to other GPUs as the resolution increases, and at 1440p in this example, it's now just 10% faster than the 3060 Ti. And another favourable result can be seen in Cyberpunk 2077 with ray tracing enabled. Here the 4060 Ti was 13% faster at 1080p. Then in a very rare example, we find that the margin is extended to 19% at 1440p, though neither product is really able to deliver playable performance with averages in both examples well below 30 FPS. The high quality preset is far more suitable for those of you not interested in upscaling, and here the 4060 Ti is just 8% faster at 1080p and then a mere 3% faster at 1440p, where both GPUs now delivered around 60 FPS. Now, I can't stress this enough, this is a best case result for the 4060 Ti in our 50 game benchmark. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, where it's 21% faster at 1080p and 20% faster at 1440p. Now, not bad gains if this was, let's say, more of the norm, and the 4060 Ti came loaded with 16GB of VRAM. I think for $400 US, okay product. And I think it's a product that some 3060 Ti owners could justify upgrading to, but again, sadly, that is not the case. And it's certainly not the norm, and in fact, a good number of games will deliver results that look more like this, what we see in Control. That's right, somehow Nvidia's managed to go backwards, and in this example, the 4060 Ti was 4% slower at 1080p and 6% slower at 1440p, but this isn't even the worst result. Rather, that honour goes to Doom Eternal, a very memory-sensitive title, and while the RTX 4060 Ti is certainly able to deliver a highly playable experience, this game does highlight one of the key issues with the 4060 Ti, and that is the 128-bit wide memory bus. Bandwidth is it's a big problem here, much more so than capacity. Obviously, losing out to the previous generation part's bad, but the 6% loss at 1080p is nothing when compared to the insane 21% reduction seen at 1440p. That is just crazy. Resident Evil 4 using the maximum quality preset provides us with another example of where the 4060 Ti manages to fall behind the part that came 2.5 years before it for the same price. And that is an impressive achievement for sure. It was 10% slower at 1080p and 9% slower at 1440p. Hogwarts Legacy with ray tracing disabled but using the high quality preset also sees the 4060 Ti trailing the 3060 Ti, this time by just 4% at 1080p and 1440p. So not a massive margin, but also shouldn't this product be at least 20% faster than its predecessor in order to justify its existence? If not 30, 40 or even 50% faster. The 4060 Ti really has no honour, and it proves this once again, this time in For Honor, where it was a mere 4% faster than 3060 Ti at 1080p, but then 3% slower at 1440p, so another truly embarrassing result here. Playing Fortnite using the DirectX 11 mode sees the 4060 Ti and 3060 Ti delivering basically identical performance at 1080p, and then identical performance at 1440p, so no real performance uplift to be seen here. The Callisto Protocol margins are similar with or without ray tracing enabled, and here we have the RT enabled results. Again, this is another example where performance is very similar at 1080p and then identical at 1440p, so just a terrible generational performance uplift here. The Hunt Showdown results are fairly typical. Basically, we're looking at a small 10% increase at 1080p and then nothing at 1440p. The 4060 Ti in this example is just a 3060 Ti at the higher resolution. Far Cry 6 was very playable using the ultra quality preset with ray tracing enabled, but the 4060 Ti is really no better than the 3060 Ti as it delivered virtually identical performance. A Plague Tale Requiem is yet another example where the 4060 Ti is basically just a 3060 Ti. Sure, it's a few frames faster at 1080p, but just increasing the resolution to 1440p is enough to neutralize the performance margin. And the last game that we're going to bother looking at the individual results for is The Last of Us Part 1, and here we see the 3060 Ti was 6% faster at 1080p, and then both are completely broken at 1440p due to a lack of VRAM, just 8GB, not cutting it here. Okay, so I'm sure you have a pretty good idea of why the RTX 4060 Ti was almost universally canned by reviewers and then shunned by consumers. But let's take a closer look at that 50 game comparison to get an even clearer picture because I'm sure at this point that is exactly what you need. So here it is, the clear picture for why the 4060 Ti sucks. For those of you not up to speed, when compared to the 3060 Ti across a massive range of games, the 4060 Ti was just 8% faster on average, which is very similar to the 9% margin seen in our 15-game day one review. Almost 70% of the configurations tested saw a margin of 10% or less, with just 2 examples where the 4060 Ti was faster by a 20% margin or more. There were also 5 examples where the 3060 Ti was faster. Not only that, but for a little over 20% of the configurations tested, the results were within a 5% margin, so we're talking about just a few frames at most in those examples. So in short, after 2.5 years, the 4060 Ti is offering, on average, just 8% more performance when compared to the 3060 Ti at 1080p for the same $400 with the same 8GB of VRAM, but what about 1440p? Well, as I'm sure you expected, things look even worse at 1440p. Here the 4060 Ti was on average just 5% faster than the 3060 Ti, which isn't a surprise given we found the exact same margin in our day one review. And that is a terrible, terrible result. And it's humorous to note that while the 4060 Ti was 20% faster in a single example, it was also 21% slower in Doom Eternal. And given that Doom result, I kind of expect that over time the 3060 Ti will actually age better than the 4060 Ti, though to be fair, neither are going to age that well with just 8GB of VRAM. Those comparison graphs really did highlight just how unbelievably bad the RTX 4060 Ti is. It's hard to believe just how horrific this generation has turned out to be, especially after the initial release of the fairly exciting but, disgustingly expensive RTX 4090. I reckon if I told you back in October last year, after reviewing the RTX 4090, that the 4060 Ti was going to cost as much as the 3060 Ti, but end up slower in a number of games, surely you would have laughed me out of the room. Hell, I'll admit it, I would have laughed at that claim, especially if you then went on to say that it would be just 5% faster on average across 50 games. And even though that's the reality we're now faced with, when I say it out loud like that, it almost seems like that cannot be right. We've gotten something wrong here, surely. Sadly though, this is the reality for gamers, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon, at least not in a meaningful way. Truth is, Nvidia just doesn't care, and they don't need to care for a few reasons. First and foremost, they don't care about gamers right now because they can sell the same silicon for much higher margins to those interested in AI, as we're going through an AI boom right now, and while that continues, Nvidia will continue to focus on that industry, leaving gamers to pay top dollar if they want to get their hands on current generation silicon. Not only that, but Nvidia can divert their attention away from gamers in the comfort of knowing they can return when AI cools off, and gamers will continue to purchase GeForce GPUs in droves. It also helps that AMD's focus also appears to be on AI, even if they are behind the game on that one, though that's nothing new for AMD's Radeon division. So with fatter margins to be found elsewhere for Nvidia and no real pressure from AMD, Nvidia will continue to divert supply towards AI-focused products while GeForce GPUs rot on shelves. So wrapping up this content, I'm sure there will be someone asking why I even bothered with this comparison, given we already knew that the GeForce RTX 4060 Ti was hot trash at $400 US. And my reasoning is simple on this one. Having seen a few examples where the 4060 Ti achieved what you'd hope to be an impossible feat, losing to its predecessor, my curiosity piqued and I just had to test more games to see if there were more examples of this happening, and as it turns out, there is. A lot more in fact. Also, I find having such a broad range of comparative data to look back on very useful for future reviews and comparisons. Anyway, that is going to do it for this one. In case you're unaware, the RTX 4060 Ti 8GB is a terrible product at $400. It should cost no more than $300. So, short of it hitting $300, you should try and get your hands on the outgoing 6700 XT, or face waiting up to a year for things to improve. There's no guarantee they will either, so bit of a gamble as to what you do there, but I guess that's always the case. In the meantime though, what's less of a gamble is you could join us over at Patreon or Floatplane, and that'll give you access to some pretty cool stuff. We have an exclusive Discord server where you can talk with myself and the rest of the awesome Hardware Unboxed community about how upset you are about current generation GPUs. Go vent over there with us. That's what we seem to do these days. We also, I'm not really selling it, am I? We also do a live stream. Tim and I get together, and we do a lot of that stuff live for you guys, exclusive Patreon float plane thing, behind the scenes content and Q&A stuff. So check that out if you're interested, but if not, that is perfectly fine. And I'll wrap this up here. See you next time.